He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of two books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 28 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Henry, we're back with another episode, this one for 2025. Our old friend Vivek Kuchibhotla, he is a faculty member of the Association of National Advertisers and the founder and president of BFC Ideas, a training consultancy in Chicago, and an old friend. So let's join the conversation. Henry, we're back with another episode, and we are joined by an old friend, Vivek Kuchibhotla, who was our first guest in 2021. We were on the air, we were dropping episodes 3-4 months and having a great time talking about all aspects of the creative brief. And I realized, well, we need to bring in some fresh blood to talk about things that Henry and I, are not as familiar with. Give us some challenge because, we there's only so much that we can talk about. And Vivek was someone we connected with on LinkedIn. We exchanged some great emails, and there was this simpatico in our approach to briefing and creative briefs and a similar background in ad agencies. So I reached out and he said yes.
I knew Vivek from before. We had
Oh,
Vivek did a training at our agency, and that's why I was linked to him on LinkedIn and so forth. So yeah.
okay. So there was on an existing relationship. I through LinkedIn and Henry through a previous training. So it was a natural connection for us. And so you became our first guest, and we've had many, many guests ever since. So as we enter our fourth year as the Brief Brothers, over 200 episodes by the time this episode airs, this is a great place to kind of reconnect and have a new conversation with an old friend. So Vivek, thanks for joining Henry and me, coming back to the Brief Brothers. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you very much for inviting me back. I was stunned to find that 4 years had gone by. Time flies. And I'm happy to be back and raise some more controversy.
Let's try it. Let's do that. Absolutely. So we like to start off by asking our guests about their background. I know that many people who follow us and see our posts on LinkedIn probably know who you are, but give our viewers the benefit of refreshing their memories. What got you into the advertising industry and a brief trajectory of your career to this point?
Well, I am a bit of an odd duck. I am a marketer. I started out in brand management, spent 10 years in blue chip brand management companies. And then after spending 10 years on that side, I decided that I wanted something else. I was always intrigued by the ad business, the advertising part of marketing. So I moved to the agency and I worked for 10 years in account management at Leo Burnett. Started out in Venezuela working on Procter Gamble. Burnett moved me around the world. I worked in Hong Kong. I worked in China. Along the way, I had a daughter who was made in Hong Kong, literally, quote unquote. And then they moved me to Chicago. I was assigned the global MacDonald's business. I did it for a couple of years. I decided that I didn't want to do it anymore. I saw an opportunity in the area of training because I've always been interested in it. And there was an opportunity in the market back then because there was very little formal training in the industry regarding the things you actually have to do in an agency. There's a lot of theory in universities, but it's not that practical. So I chose a couple of subjects in that area. I focused on them, and I've spent 20 years in that area, over 20 years actually. And over the last few years, I've also I've developed partnership with a senior advertising guy out of Mexico called Ricardo Ferraris, and we do agency search as well, which has given me a bunch of insights into the industry from a different perspective. So that's
Well, you and I have a common connection to the Marketing, Training, and Development Center at the Association of National Advertisers, where we're on the faculty. You do a handful of workshops. I do a handful of workshops. We both have been trainers for a couple of decades. I've been with the ANA for about 7-8 years. You are fairly new, but it seems to me that your background with Leo Burnett and Procter and Gamble is amazing training for agency process. What would you say you learned the most from your experience at both with Procter and Gamble as one of your clients and at Leo Burnett?
Let me use an analogy. I think the relationship between marketers and advertisers and agencies, sorry, marketers and agencies, is like a married couple where the husband speaks German. This would be the marketer. The wife speaks French. They don't understand each other. And when they don't understand each other, they just speak louder. They say the same thing in the same language. They say it louder. They still don't understand each other. And then the husband gets angry and the wife starts cowering in fear. And that's where we are right now. We're in a situation where they don't seem to have any common understanding of what they're doing. They're talking at each other, and they're not helping each other achieve any of their common objectives.
Wow, talk about an important need to call 911. And when you call 911, Vivek is going to answer the phone, right? I mean, that's the topic of one of the workshops that you've developed for the ANA, and you'd probably do it outside the ANA as well. Talk
Yep.
to us about what that training entails and how you think you can, if not prevent the divorce, soothe things and bring the couple together.
Well, I think this is a workshop that's designed for marketing departments. And I like to call the title of the workshop is Agency Whispering, right? Because you don't actually manage an agency, just like you don't manage your spouse. That doesn't work. You have to work with your agency, right? And you have to understand that the cultures, the objectives, the passions, the motivations on each side are different, right? So marketers will operate very much along military lines. I mean, there's hierarchies, there's marching orders, while agencies operate very much more as talent, as a rock band. So imagine, if you will, a marriage between the Marines and Queen, the rock band. And that's what you're trying to make work. And the Marines are applying Marine principles to get Freddie Mercury to do his job. But they haven't understood that applying Marine principles doesn't work when you're dealing with highly talented, highly conflicted talent, as it were.
Well, isn't that where the account management staff is supposed to come in and be the United Nations, the translator of the two?
Yeah.
Or am I overthinking that?
No, that's how it used to be. And Henry, you're very quiet. I'm getting very nervous about that. But I think what's happened is that over the last 20 years, the account management function has been weakened and has lost credibility with marketers and has lost credibility with creatives. And what they've become is sort of I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but what the hell, I'm going to say it. It's they've sort of become babysitters, and their job is to make sure that the creatives behave and that the problems just don't spiral out of control, basically. Do what the client wants, get the creative to behave, and please don't get me fired.
So is anyone stepping up and taking over the role of what account management used to be?
I don't see it. Do you, Henry?
No, but I also think that it's a gross overgeneralization. I think there are agencies that have long-standing relationships with their clients where, ups and downs, of course, because any long-term relationship does. And then there are, relationships that are more fraught. And we see clients that go into review every 2 or 3 years, partially because of exactly what you're saying, partially because of other reasons. For example, on the same side, I could say a lot of clients don't have trained marketers in charge of their marketing function anymore. They have people that they brought in from other functional areas within the organization, from R&D, from sales, from different parts of the organization, and they put them in a marketing role, and they've never had any experience or any practical training in it either. So I see it as a problem on both sides. It does plague the industry at large. Obviously, it's a generalization of the state of affairs.
It is a generalization, but I will say one thing. There has never been more per project work than there is right now. And the average length of an advertiser agency relationship has never been shorter, right? So it is a generalization, but the trend lines are not good.
Of
They're
course,
not moving in the right direction.
But also within the overall trend are other trends. For example, the circular door of CEOs and CMOs affects that agency tenure, right? So there's no long-term relationship anymore with anybody because there's nobody at the client that's there long-term. The financial aspects of the business as well, where clients are just looking to cut costs, and the agencies have just become tactical vendors, and that's why you get all this project work.
Agreed. And I would add one more thing to this discussion, which is seldom put on the table, but the vast majority of the profit of the ad industry has been sucked away by the Googles, the Facebooks, the TikToks, and they've managed to turn what used to be a craft into an algorithm. And they speak client language. So when they go to a client and say, well, you can spend this much and this is going to be your return and these are the clicks you're going to get, this is the return you're going to get on your investment, those numbers look great. May not really mean anything, but they've certainly convinced a lot of clients to take their money there, and the agencies are left fighting for the crumbs. The agencies are just selling man hours now, fighting over the crumbs.
Yeah,
Bob, who we had on last week, pretty much said the same thing. The agencies have actually become sales reps for Google and TikTok and Facebook.
Yeah, the whole concept of craftsmanship, as you alluded to just a moment ago, Vivek, is on the wane, out the door. And you talk to senior level creatives inside, especially outside the agency world, and that's the lament. Craftsmanship is out the door.
Well, if you also two things. First of all, there is the ANA study about programmatic and how much money is not reaching the audience. I mean, the numbers are stunning,
And
right?
Bob Hoffman's book, Ad Scam, which really documents it in minute detail.
It's stunning, and I'm surprised that procurement departments in marketing companies have not started focusing on this to a greater degree and are spending their time messing around with whether it's 1 FTE more or 2 FTE more with the agency when the big money is being misspent. Let me say misspent elsewhere. But the other thing that the question I would ask, and I don't have an answer, but I think it's very worrisome, is the fact that in this era of hyper targeting, of lots of access to data, tailor-made messages, dynamic, creative, call it what you want, and targeting people exactly at the right time on the right device with the right message. And still we're looking at response rates of, I don't know, 2%. What that really is saying is that 98% of your hyper segmented target is not interested in what you're saying. And I think that is terrifying.
In the direct marketing, direct response world, 2% is a great result. But you're talking about now something, we're not talking about direct marketing, are we?
We're talking about mass marketing now.
Mass marketing, right?
Mass marketing.
I think George Tannenbaum is going to be a guest, and he's soon Christmas Day, as a matter of fact, which is going to be in our past. But he also comments on a similar. He has a similar observation that the branding world has disconnected from, or has there's a kind of a dividing line between hyper targeting and mass marketing, where mass marketing, which is proven to be far more effective, has been abandoned in favor of the hyper targeted marketing, but the numbers don't justify it.
They don't justify it.
So
that's a big question.
So you have another. Well, before I go on to the other workshops that you do for the ANA and the other training that you do, how have you found the reception to this training that you do on, what was it called? Agency whispering? Was that what the topic?
Agency whispering.
What is
how to work with the agents?
What is your sense of the response that you've had to this training? Are people sitting up and taking notice? Are they paying attention? What's your sense?
They are taking notice. There's a lot of things that we talk about in the training that are never discussed in your everyday work with the agency. I'll give you an example. One of the things we talk about is to agree on what your creative goalposts are, right? And every brand has a language, right? Let's agree on what it is. So, for example, if I am Old Spice, right? I would define the creative goalposts for Old Spice as maybe quirky, irreverent, satirical. And once we come to agreement, then we all know what we're pointing at, and the agency knows that they should only present work that fits with those goalposts, and the marketer should commit to never approving anything that's outside those goalposts. It makes the work so much more efficient.
Are you saying that a lot of brands don't understand their own, to use your term, goalposts?
Yeah. And even if the brand does understand it, the agency might have another interpretation of it. So you need to have a common understanding of it, right? And that's where it comes together and it works. Because remember, there's a lot of turnover on both sides, right? So You know, you'll have one group of people at the agency for a couple of years and then a different group of marketers, and everyone comes with different ideas. And if you don't have those goalposts clearly defined, everyone's going to go off in their own interpretation.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it goes beyond just the goalposts. An client will have an RFP. They'll look at 4 or 5 different agencies. It'll get down to 2 or 3. They'll hire one. They'll negotiate a scope of work. And nowhere during that process does the client really have a deep conversation with the people at the top of the agency about what they feel about creativity, what the role of creativity should be in this account. Are we shooting for really breakthrough, get noticed advertising? Are we looking for hardworking, very rational advertising? What is the role of creativity on this account? We don't have those frank conversations. And then the other part of that, and I keep bouncing it back to the clients, typical for an agency guy, right? But not only does the client have a different view of what the goalposts are, a lot of times they haven't even done the exercise themselves internally among the big bureaucracy that everybody's on the same page about what the goalposts are creatively. So you have an agency that's reporting into who ultimately is not the final decider, right? And then, so there's a game of telephone. You have these mid-level managers managing the agency. And by the time the work gets to the actual approver, right, who's never in on the main meetings, it's a surprise. It's, anything can happen.
The goalposts change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've, go ahead.
Just to add one more thing. This is not to push any specific set of goalposts. I mean, for example, during the Burger King Fernando Machado era, it was very clear that the goalposts that they had were, we want to win awards, and that's fine as long as you agree on it. Old Spice did something else.
In defense of Fernando, I think it was a little deeper than that. I think the byproduct of it was winning a lot of awards. I think they felt, and I know they felt, that being number 2 as they were, and being a challenger brand and not having the budgets of the big competitor, that they would be foolish to try to win a conventional war. So their idea was, we're going to do noteworthy things that have what Fernando called talkability, that would become viral, that would go well beyond whatever media budget there was. And if you could pull a string of 7 or 8 of those in a year, it would multiply your budget. So I think that there was a strategy there. I think the byproduct of that was the agencies were coming up with really crazy stuff to have that talkability, and that's the kind of stuff that happens to win awards.
I agree 100%. In fact, you could redefine those goalposts as saying more bang for the buck. And that's fine. But the point is, define them.
Yeah.
No?
I think Paul Feldwick addressed an aspect of this issue in both of his books, the Why the Peddler Sings and what's the other one called? The Anatomy of Humbug. My bookshelf is up here. When he talks about the dearth of understanding a brand history in our industry. People come on board of a company, they might be there for 2 or 3 years, and they have no concept of that brand's history prior to their arrival because they have no interest in learning, because they're going to be moving on to the next job in 2 or 3 years. So a brand that could be around for 100 years, even a 50-year-old brand, has no depth of understanding. The people who work there have no depth of understanding of that brand. So
That's
how can you?
That's
why you have to define it.
That's why I keep saying that big brands should invest an FTE in having a brand historian.
Yep.
Who's not just a historian, but a marketer who can explain, this is what happened, this is the roots of the brand, this is the campaigns that we've had. I don't think anybody has any of that institutional memory. I think very few clients have that kind of institutional memory anywhere housed, and I think it would be a good expenditure.
I mean, Burger King is a good example of a brand that brought back stuff from previous iterations. They went back to the 70s and 80s to bring back a logo and an approach and some taglines. They know their own history. You know, how many other brands can say they do the same thing?
So, just to build on this, in the whispering workshop, agency whispering, you define your creative goalposts, and then you make sure you have a briefs and briefings process that is efficient and inspiring, and that's you guys' wheelhouse. My point always in this is, it's not about documents, it's about thinking, it's about talking, it's about coming to agreements and then executing. But as far as I can see, there's still a lot of, I write a document and I give it to you, and then you go and translate it into something else, and it goes back and forth. And I personally have reservations about that briefing process. So, but the thought is, work with your agency, get the best briefing process possible. And very important, since the agency is the one who is going to have to work with your brief, do it the way the agency wants. Because at the end of the day, it's raw material for them. For you, it's a document. For them, it's the source of where their inspiration's coming from. So make it easy for them. And the third thing we talk about in this workshop, among other things, but these are the highlights, is let's figure out a way to make feedback and approvals efficient so that it actually helps protect the quality of the work instead of basically destroying it presentation by presentation by presentation.
That seems like, well, it looks like Henry has a question. Go for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think this is a good point to tell people who maybe didn't see you in the first interview we did with you way back, but to talk about Juniorcito and Juniorcita.
That's a good, yeah, we should remind our viewers about that. That's good.
Juniorcito. Well, I'm going to tell a story of Juniorcito, and I'm going to say it because I was Juniorcito, so I can actually, this is a confession, let me put it like that. One of the problems that agencies face is that the point person on the business is normally the most junior marketer. And the most junior marketer is in a situation, a very uncomfortable situation, because he has had little, if no, formal training on advertising, but he's put in the spotlight. In any copy presentation, he is the one who is asked to comment first, and he doesn't know exactly what to say. He doesn't have the authority to approve anything, and his boss is looking over his shoulder, evaluating him to see if he says something smart.
Who also probably has not said what the expectations are in the first.
Of course. Of course.
Okay, I'm going to channel the client this, because I've had that situation when I've done a training on reviewing creative. I'm just going to channel what I've heard back from the client. Of course, we're going to put our Juniorcito and Juniorcita on the spot, and we want to hear from them because this is how they learn.
And you know, and that's great. Back in the old days of full commission, agencies could afford that. Agencies can't afford to train marketers nowadays.
No,
that's not
I agree.
viable.
I'm only channeling because I've had that kind of pushback when I've said the same thing, and the way Henry and I talk about it is that junior should be seen but not heard. And I made the mistake of actually speaking those words out loud in a training, and that grazed ire. Oh, this is part of our training process. We want to hear from our juniors.
I would argue that Juniorcito and Juniorcita will learn more if the actual approver speaks, gives good, clear direction, and they get to watch and observe that process happen.
I wish I had my little buttons here so I could do a little applause, but I don't know how those things work on Zoom. if I do this?
Absolutely. And actually
That doesn't
the
work.
in this whispering workshop, one of the things we recommend is that the decision maker actually, after seeing the work, he leads an internal discussion with his team, provides guidance, aligns everyone, focuses them on the idea and not the execution, clearly identifies what needs to be addressed and what might be considered, because it's not the same thing, and then delivers the feedback to the agency so that the agency gets one set of feedback from someone who has the authority to make it stick, and not just a random set of comments that mean nothing and you don't know what to deal with.
All right, you promised to throw some bombs, so I'm going to hold your feet to the fire here. You said a moment ago that you had some issues with the briefing and the brief process. I don't want to let you go without asking you to expand on that. And since it's been almost about 3.5 years since you've been on our show, and we've exchanged a number of emails, and you've brought things to LinkedIn on this topic. Has anything changed in the last since you've been on to make you feel any better about this or change your thinking about it? And let's talk about it.
Not really. I think I would say that I have issues with two things in the current brief process. The first one is that it's too document focused. It's about writing documents, and I am very much in the camp that the brief should be the summary or the agreements of a discussion. Because I think when you write documents, we live in a world of ideas. We don't really live in a world of documents. And the other thing I think is that
Well, wait.
there is a
Before you go on, I just want to ask you, but when you say you're not as in favor of a document because we're in the world of ideas, I mean, the headline is something you write down on a piece of paper. I mean, are you talking about a brief that's written by a single individual? Because you and I would agree that that's too myopic. I mean, I for one train around the idea of collaboration. Let's get a couple of heads in the room and work on a document the way an art director and a copywriter work on a concept. It's collaborative. Is
that's how I see it. That's
Okay.
how I see it. My criticism is I have to write a brief. Let me write a document, right?
It becomes a form. It's a form that you have to fill out to get a project started. Is what it devolves into, instead of the powerful thing that it could be, if done thoughtfully, written well, presented well, and talked about in the course of a briefing well.
So the way I would look at it is when we're working on new business and we have time constraints and it's an important project, the way we normally do it is the senior people get together, they talk about it, they play around with different approaches, and hopefully they coalesce on what they think is the best approach. And that becomes the marching orders for the development of the whole pitch presentation. I would use that as an example of how I think briefings should work. People should talk about the issues. They should not close out any avenues early on in the discussion because they're off strategy. And once you find the idea, because great ideas always raise their hands, everyone gets excited about them. And once you have a great idea, you can capture its elements in a document and you all move ahead. So I'm very much in the camp of working together, brainstorming, discussing, and then capturing it in a document. So that would be my number one comment. And the number two comment is, I believe there is a belief that there's one right strategy, but it can be executed in many different ways. I don't agree with that. I think there's many strategies that can be executed in many different ways. And what we're looking for is the most original strategy with the best execution. So I don't believe that we should lock into it has to be this strategy and now you go away and execute. So I would say those are continue to be my two my commentary on the current briefing process.
I'm going to guess I'm going to speak for Henry when I say this. I've done a lot of training on the workshop with marketers, whereas Henry works exclusively with his fellow strategists and creatives. And I've encountered situations where I go in to do a training and the marketers will say, yeah, we usually get about 20 minutes to write a brief just before the kickoff. And then, I'm sure, I know that that's not uncommon. It's probably not as severe a situation, in the agency world, but I haven't been in the agency world for a while. So under those circumstances, it's like, yes, you could have multiple creative briefs for the same project, just like you could have multiple propositions for one brief. And you could send off 6 teams to attack each of those problems, except most agencies don't have 6 teams. Most agencies don't have the time to develop 3 briefs.
Agreed.
It's certainly, in theory, it's certainly a great idea, but how do
you make it work?
How do you make it work? Yeah.
Well, 2 things I'd say. One thing is a question I would have, because when you look at the size of marketing budgets, there's very few other budgets of the same size in a company, right? The marketing expenditure is typically one of the biggest outlays of money that the company has every year. So you'd think that there would be enough time and resources to make sure that that money is spent in the best possible manner. So while I've heard well, we don't have enough time to write a brief comment many times, I think people need to take a step back and reconsider how much money is at stake, and therefore you need to spend the time and the effort to get it right. I mean, that's certainly one thing. But the other thing I think is that I am of the belief that most of the time strategy does not inspire creativity. I think creativity happens, and I think strategy should be used to filter it, but not to inspire it.
Wow, that was fighting words.
I know, but you wanted bombs, Howard. So here I'm throwing bombs.
Well, Henry's just like cool, calm. He's, I think he's waiting for the happy hour to get started, is quite frankly. So,
yeah.
So listen, I don't disagree with Vivek. In fact, I've told you, Howard, and we've repeated many times on the podcast that for me, goal number 1 of the brief is it clear? If I can inspire something, and the way we talk about inspiring is that before we even leave the meeting, creatives are already sparking ideas because something was provocative in the brief. That's a bonus. That's a big plus, and I love that. It makes me feel great. But if the creatives who are paid to do what they do are good, as long as it's clear, we should be good. And I liken the strategist role, I've used this analogy before, to a hitting coach on a Major League Baseball team. These players are Major League players. They got there because they're talented. They know how to hit the ball. What the coach, the hitting coach, does is he might find a few holes in their swing. He might find their an opportunity that they didn't see, and be a second pair of eyes. But the truth is, the world can live without strategists, just like a Major League Baseball team can live without a hitting coach.
And I agree with that because some of the best briefs that I've seen and are part of my growing collection on the Creative Brief Archive have single-minded propositions or propositions, whatever you want to call them, that are boring as hell. If your expectation is inspiring, they're boring, they're simple, they're not sexy, but damn, they're clear. And if you can't, as a creative, I look at it and said, okay, I know exactly what I need to do on this. It's not sexy, but I know exactly how to approach, how to solve the problem with that simple line.
It's their
So,
job to make it sexy.
yes, exactly. So in other words, inspiring is kind of a nebulous term. We don't necessarily think of inspiring as that all of us, oh, it's a headline, my work is done. I mean, that happens occasionally, but it's not the objective of a brief writer to write a public facing language, which is a headline or a slogan. It happens. I'm just looking for something that says, oh, now I know where to go. I'm going to go take this path. And, Henry said many, many times, and I admired the hell out of it. He said, I have to be humble. Sometimes the creatives will go off in a direction that had nothing to do with my brief. And they'll come back to me and say, well, sorry, Henry, we started here, but we took a left turn and this is what we came up with. It happens enough so that Henry said, okay, I'll rewrite the brief to reflect that idea because the idea is so good.
Yeah,
And
that's what I push for. Let's find that idea, and then everything else will fall into place. Now, the big question is, how do you find that idea? And that's where you need to understand creative thinking, one thing, and you need to have senior smart people in the room. And I don't particularly like the way the departments are described. You got the account people, you got the planners, you got the creatives. To me, a better way to describe them is senior smart people, and then people who are trained in executing advertising. The copywriters, the art directors, all those people. And I think if you put this group of people together, you give them a problem, you let them loose on it, they will solve it. Hopefully, they'll come up with an idea that everyone loves. And then the executors, for lack of a better word, the copywriters, the art directors will execute it. But everyone is capable of coming up with an idea. And when I say idea, I'm not talking about a headline. I'm not talking about any executional elements. I'm talking about ad ideas. Anyone can come up with an ad idea. And that's my focus. I think the linear approach, this is one department that does one thing that hands it off to another department, is not very efficient. I don't believe much in it.
And then I think that's kind of an old school approach because, it is a collaborative process. Entirely, everybody has to have a say. Well, I think this idea, this agency whisperer concept for your workshop, is brilliant. It's needed, and it sounds like it's starting to have some impact, both when you offer it through the ANA and on your own. You have other workshops, and I think we'd love to have you come back and talk about what you do on some of these other topics. But this has been a great exploration of a big problem in the agency world today, managing these relationships. So Vivek Kuchibhotla, thank you so much for coming back to the Brief Brothers. Henry and I, it was great to see you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. Together, we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.